Hi, Ms. Gupta. Thank you so much for the interview. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And I just wanted to say that I'm so honored to be speaking to someone who is so dedicated to such an important cause.
Thank
Um,
you so much.
no problem. So, your organization, Apne Aap, is a very huge inspiration to so many people like me who want to get involved in the similar line of work. So,
Okay.
what I was wondering is, can you tell us the main reason, the primary reason that you decided to delve into this cause, saving so many women from sex trafficking and sex exploitation?
Okay. To start with, I used to be a journalist, and I was walking through the hills of Nepal when I came across rows of villages which didn't have any girls from age 15 to 45. And that's when I began to ask the questions that where were the girls? And some of the men looked sheepish, some looked away, some walked away, but some answered. And they said, don't you know they all are in Bombay? And that was even more puzzling because I couldn't understand how so many girls could be in Bombay, which was like 1400 kilometers away from these remote villages. And to my horror, when I began to look for the answer to the question, then I found that slavery still existed in our lifetime, in our world. There was a whole supply chain from the village to the brothels of Bombay, which included a procurer who could be a neighbor, an uncle, a brother, who would go to parents who were mostly poor farmers and tell them that, I'll get your daughter a job in the big city or get her a marriage or something. And sometimes, even if they were starving, he would say, I'll put her into prostitution, but at least she'll earn something and have a bed and food. So these farmers would let their daughters go. And these procurers would bring together 3 or 4 girls, take them to the big cities of Kathmandu, hand them over to a set of agents who would put them into buses, take them to the border of India and Nepal, and there were the very corrupt border guards. Wink, wink, nod, nod. These girls were taken across the border. On the other side of the border, they were handed over to these lodge keepers, and these lodge keepers would lock up the girls for 2 or 3 days in their lodges, starve them, beat them till their spirits were completely subjugated, then hand them over to some transporters who would put them on trains and buses and then take them to the brothels of Calcutta, Bombay, Delhi, where there were agents who would negotiate the price of these girls based on their beauty and age. The younger a girl was, she would fetch a higher price. If she was fair skinned, a higher price. Docile, smiling, voluptuous, higher prizes. And by higher price, what do I mean? Like, between $100 to $300 maximum. And that was paid off to these transporters. And the agents, or the pimps as I like to call them, would take these girls. And these pimps would hand them over to the brothel managers. And these girls, most of them between the ages of 9 and 13, were then locked up in small rooms for 5 years. And there, the brothel managers would bring to them 8 to 10 customers a night, where these girls were raped repeatedly, and each customer would give the money to the brothel manager, just 50 cents, sometimes a couple of dollars if the girl was a virgin. And over 5 years, this girl simply lost her childhood, her life, her ability to think, her ability to feel. She was forced to become dependent on drugs and alcohol to block out the experience of the repeated rape. She was also forced by the brothel manager to have children in the first 2 years so that the love of a baby would stop her from running away from the brothel, because the baby was kept as hostage. And she was also taught, most tragically, to call the brothel manager Mama and the pimp Papa, so that she would begin to believe that this was her family and she had no other family and she could never go back. So besides, not unlike slavery in the 19th century where chains were put on people and all of that, there were no chains, but it was a mind game and social control. Besides being locked up, of course, in the room every night, and behind these brothel managers were the landlords, the financiers, the organized criminal networks. So I wanted to do something about it. I was absolutely horrified that in my generation and in my country, slavery still existed, and I felt I felt that journalism was too limiting, but I also didn't know anything else. So I ended up making a documentary on the subject called The Selling of Innocence on this trafficking from Nepal to Bombay to at least expose the problem. And the documentary, I went on to win an Emmy for the documentary, but also what happened was that it changed my life making the documentary. So I didn't want to just remain in journalism. I wanted to do something else and more. And I was angry, I was outraged, and all of that. So then a new journey began for me because I won the Emmy, but I resigned from the place I was working in, and took a consultancy with the United Nations and went off into Southeast Asia to see how women in prostitution were combating AIDS. At the same time, with the 22 women in prostitution who had helped me make The Selling of Innocence in the brothels of Bombay, I set up an organization called Apne Aap, Women Worldwide. Now, there's also a history behind setting up this organization because there were 2 points when this organization was born. One was that when I was making The Selling of Innocence, a pimp or a customer, somebody pulled out a knife on me and said that, how dare you make this documentary, and I'm going to kill you. And literally the 22 women who later set up Apne Aap, they surrounded me at that time. And they said, no, if you kill her, you've got to kill us first. Because we want her to tell our story so that the same destiny, fate, is not that of our daughters. We want to save our daughters from this exploitation, from the slavery. And so they saved my life. And later, when I finished making the documentary and I was going away, they said, can you not help us to save our daughters and our lives? And I said, but you know how. You protected me, so we can help each other. And, I don't just need to be helping you. You are helping me. Let's do it together. And that's why we called it Apne Aap, because Apne Aap is about self-empowerment. And we believe that if you find strength within yourself and you collectively share that strength with others in a small group, then you can really challenge very, very big problems. And so with those 22 women in prostitution, I set up Apne Aap in Bombay, in a room in a brothel, literally. And later, we managed to get some rooms inside a municipal school and began to run a community classroom for the children of women in prostitution. They ran like a mother's group initially. And I remember the women telling me at that time that they had 4 dreams. And the first dream was that they wanted an education for their children. The second was that they wanted a job. It's a job in an office mean. So they said a job where they would have retirement benefits, where nobody would beat them, where their body was not constantly penetrated, where there was no violence. It was 9 to 5, etc. And the third dream was a room of their own, which is very much like Virginia Woolf. And I remember them telling me something just this long, this big, where no one will push us around, where no one will beat us, and where we won't be kicked, which is our own. And the fourth dream was legal protection from the police and the clients and the brothel systems. And today, Apne Aap is 10 years old. We have reached out over the years to more than 15,000 girls and women in different brothels in India. But we have the same 4 dreams, which is education, jobs, which are both sustainable and dignified, and safe and independent housing, and legal protection from any kind of brutality, either by clients, johns, pimps, anybody. And the access that any girl in India should access to education and jobs. We still struggle for that, and we organize around that.
That's wonderful. So I was wondering, based off of what you just told me, why is there such a demand for younger girls, for girls who are 12, or for girls who are virgins? Why is there that demand?
Some men who suffer from AIDS or sexually transmitted diseases like syphilis believe falsely, of course, that sex with a virgin will cure them of those sexually transmitted diseases. So that's one of the reasons that they want younger girls. The other is that they just want to, they're not buying sex inside the brothels, they're buying domination. And so the younger a girl is, the more they feel very powerful, very strong just by dominating them. So the more infantile, the more younger looking, the more fragile looking, the men who are buying them, the prostitute buyers, they get a power kick because they're ultimately buying domination. So that's why this demand for younger and younger guys. They don't want any women who are the equal. Mm-hmm. In fact, many of them are running away from the idea of equality with a woman. Many of the customers that I've talked to, they say that, oh, you know, she talks back to me. I can't have that kind of sex with my wife. You know, I'm tired of all these women. They are paying for the kind of sex in which they can just be brutal, violent. They're buying violence and domination. And all the women in prostitution that I've talked to, and I've talked to thousands now all over India, but also all over the world, including the United States and New York or Amsterdam. And all of them have told me that they have faced violence, cigarette butts stubbed out on them, bottles shoved up their vaginas. So, you know, these men are buying violence and brutality and domination.
And when you were talking to women who had worked in this field from India and from other places as well, did you find any differences between the two regions?
I found that actually the story of violence was very common between women in Amsterdam, New York, or New Delhi. They all had faced from their customers and also the brothel system, the pimps and the brothel managers who control them. They all had faced immense amounts of violence, from beatings to repeated rape to belts being used on them to ice being used if they were pre-menstruating and their vaginas were too tight, to forced abortions, to being slapped around was common, fractures. There's a group that I work with just outside Delhi of 102 women, and they told me that they face at least a couple of fractures a month because all the clients are beating them. And I found this common even in New York, where I talked to survivors of prostitution, and they told me the kinds of violence they faced was from customers trying to throttle them, to peeing on them, to beating them, all of that. And in South Africa, I remember going to a township outside Cape Town, and a survivor of prostitution showing me in her hand full of marks where men had tried to stab her, the very men who wanted to have sex with her. So I've seen this kind in Amsterdam, the same story. Women were telling me that they had to pay protection money to pimps just so that when a client started attacking them, the pimp would come and protect them.
God.
And the other thing that I found, two more things which I found common between all these places, East or West, North or South, India or America, was that all the women said they did not want the same fate for their daughters. They wanted to save their daughters from prostitution, and they wanted to make sure that the daughters got an education and jobs which were violence-free.
So, I noticed that I was reading some articles, and I noticed that a lot of the time in India, a specific term that was being used is sex workers. So what I was wondering is, what do you think this term is appropriate, and why is it being used so often?
That's a very good question, and sex should not be work. Because sex should be something which people enjoy and which is shared between two individuals. So if I pay for it, the other person doesn't get sex.
Yeah.
So the other person is simply penetrated in her part of the body or his part of the body, the one who's paid for. So why is this term sex worker used is very interesting to me. That why is this term coming up? And one of the reasons is that the sex industry is trying to change the way we think about the subject. so that people feel that there is no exploitation involved. And, there's no physical exploitation involved, there is no body penetration, because, sometimes language defines how we think. So when we think of sex work, then it seems like an ordinary job. But when we think of prostitution, then we begin to think, oh, what's going on, and it takes us into a different mental journey where we do know that a girl is being raped, where her body is being invaded different times in different ways, where there is physical violence. So, I think the sex industry has had some influence on getting the term sex worker becoming so commonly used. And the way they have been able to do it is they've been very strategic. Sense. But for the girl who's locked up in a brothel and raped repeatedly, she's just a victim of rape. And so I prefer using the term prostituted child to show and to define that somebody else did it to the child. Prostituted, so that it's not that she did it to herself. And there's a second party and a third party involved. And also, for women, I use women in prostitution, because sometimes for poor and marginalized, low-caste girls and women, prostitution may be a survival strategy where, they have no food, they have no bed, someone is pimping them, someone is beating them, so they may end up in prostitution thinking, okay, I'll get some food in exchange. But it's not the choice that they would have had in circumstances if they had jobs and education and real choices. So I use the term woman in prostitution to remove the stigma, but also to show that it's temporary, so that given real choices, she would actually be doing something else. At best, it can be an occupation. And it's sad that so many people use the term sex worker so easily without thinking about the implications of what it actually means to the person who's at the receiving end of this. Because this should not be a job. If a job is inherently exploitative, we have labor standards all over the world now, and we don't allow for such jobs to exist. In mines earlier, people had to crawl into mines. But we've legislated that away and said that, mines have to be a certain height where a man has to walk straight. But in prostitution, body penetration is so inherent. It is part of the work. So it is inherently exploitative, which even cannot be legislated away, come what may. So why should we accept that, and why should we lower the threshold of what we want for girls and women as jobs?
Do you remember the very, very first girl that you ever saved?
Yes, I do. Actually, it was the first woman, and her name was Surekha. She was the first member of Apne Aap, and she had a daughter called Sonu. So Sonu was the first girl. Surekha, I met her in Bombay when I was making The Selling of Innocence. And she is one of the first 22 women in Apne Aap who said that let's organize. I want a different destiny for my daughter. I want a job in an office, and I want a room of my own. Surekha was one of the first to tell me that. And Surekha is still alive, but she's got AIDS, and so she has a tough life. But her daughter, we put into school, and she has not only finished high school, but now she's taking a course in animation. Her name is Sonu, and she wants to be an animation artist.
That's great. And so when you first helped Sonu and Surekha, how did it feel? Was it more than you had expected?
At that time, I just wanted to get Sonu into school, and Surekha with a room where she would not be beaten and thrown around. And I had no idea that the dreams they articulated and the stands they took would suddenly become this movement in India, where I managed to reach out to 15,000 women and also been able to influence the Indian government to make different laws and explain to other women that, you can get your daughters into school. Prostitution is not inevitable and things can change. So, we've been able to get 814 children who are daughters of women in prostitution into school. And Sonu is, of course, our first success. But this year in Bihar, in a small village called Forbisganj, the first batch of the children of prostitutes from that area, from a community known as the Nut community, which suffers from intergenerational prostitution. They are very much like the Romas in Europe, like the Gypsies. And, prostitution was being passed down from mother to daughter there. The first batch of those daughters is going to be giving the high school exam in March this year.
Wow.
And so that entire community is turning around. The mothers are feeling good about it because they managed to put their daughters into school. 5 years later, now the first batch is giving exams, and they'll be going on to college, and the community itself will change.
Yeah. So, in a recent study by Trust Law, which I was reading, it ranked India as the worst G20 country in which a woman should live. And so even lower than Indonesia. So what I was wondering is, in your perspective and from your widespread experience, could this be possible or true?
Absolutely, it is possible and it is true. India has probably the highest rates of violence against women, and the violence begins from birth to death. Actually, from the time when we are conceived. Starting with amniocentesis, because if you're a girl and you're very likely to be tested in the womb and aborted right away, because there's a son preference. Then there could be infanticide, where a little bit of poison on your tongue, or you could be buried, or whatever, which happens in village after village in Haryana and Rajasthan and Bihar. If you survive amniocentesis and infanticide, then very likely what can happen is that you could be the victim of child marriage, because your father feels that the earlier he gets you married, you'll be safer in your husband's home than becoming prey to traffickers or others. So you could very easily be the victim of child marriage, and then die early, because you have to give birth to a child before your body is fully formed from maternal mortality. And before you've given birth to yourself, you have to actually give birth to a child. And if you survive that, then you could also very much be the victim of dowry and burnt because you haven't brought in enough money, or your husband's family or your husband wants more money. And if you survive all of that, and if you're not the victim of child marriage, you could also be trafficked into prostitution, which is becoming so common in India. The National Human Rights Commission says the average age of entry into prostitution is 9 to 13 years old in India. The Central Bureau of Investigation says that there are 3 million women and girls trapped in prostitution, even as we speak. So you could become the victim of trafficking for prostitution, of domestic servitude, organ trade, all kinds of things. And, very often you, as a girl, you could be married to someone much older than you, so you could become a widow, thrown out of the family when your husband dies, because their family does not want you to inherit property, and die on the sidewalk begging. So literally, a woman is in danger from the time she's conceived to the time she dies in India. And she's undesired, she's devalued, she's not sent to the same school as her brother, if sent to school at all. She's given food to eat after the family eats very often, so her growth is more stunted. If she can overcome all of that, then she's taught, that she has to be docile. If she's a good girl, she has to bow down to her parents' wishes, her husband's wishes, not to have dreams and aspirations of her own. Even in middle-class families, girls are told that soon you're going to be married, so learn how to behave, how to sit, how to speak, how to laugh, learn how to cook so that you can serve your husband's family properly or your husband properly. So even in educated middle-class families, this notion of patriarchy continues. And it's very hard for a girl who gets so many confusing messages to be able to stand up on her own.
And I was just wondering, do you know, or why? I'm just so curious, where did this kind of germ and seed of patriarchy come into India? Why did it arise? Even though I know history had a huge role in it, I was just wondering, in modern times, the world has progressed in terms of feminism, and women's rights has increased significantly, but not as much as India. I mean, the victims are, the ones who are blamed in rapes, not the perpetrators, because of how a woman dresses, or oh, she was out too late at night to watch a film. So I'm just wondering, do you know why? Still,
I think there are many reasons for it. One, of course, is that we have religion plays a big part, right? So there's a thing called Manu Smriti, which sort of was the code under which Hindu law was made, where a woman's place was supposed to be in the home serving her husband. She had less value than that of a cow, and she was supposed to be like a field. So that was defined in Manu Smriti. And while Manu Smriti, of course, is not the law of the land in India anymore, and Indian women are have very good laws working on their behalf in independent India. But it's played a role in the subconsciousness of the Indian mindset. So that is one thing. The other thing is what has also happened is that we've had a series of colonization by Mughals and then the British, and they brought in their own sort of patriarchal notions into Indian society. Remember when India was ruled by the British, we had Queen Victoria, and there were Victorian norms which are also very patriarchal, so superimposed on our own Hindu norms, we got Victorian Christian morals imposed on us as well. And before that, we had Mughal values imposed on us. So this hodgepodge, of course, just continued to subjugate women. There have been moments in history where Indian women have been free and emancipated, such as the time when Buddhism was rising in India, where there was an onslaught on the caste system, but also an onslaught on gender, because Buddhism was trying to create a more egalitarian in independent India. We've had some luck because in our freedom struggle, can you hear me?
yeah, I can hear you now.
So, because in our freedom struggle, what happened was that Gandhi and Nehru and other leaders actually made sure that Indian women participated in the freedom struggle. So they were out marching on the streets, and we had very big leaders like Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay, Sarojini Naidu, and leader after leader who were marching on the streets, throwing away their jewelry, burning their foreign-made textile saris, and so that they got out of the homes to fight for emancipation. And by doing that, they emancipated themselves. Because in India, when India became independent, we did not have to fight for the right to vote. We did not have to fight for the right to have an abortion. It was part of our law when we became independent. And that helped a lot because, at least for those who could afford it, Indian women began to get an education. And they began to become teachers, doctors, lawyers, rocket scientists, politicians. Our prime minister was a woman. So there was some shift. But of course, there was also a backlash because at the same time, India was not able to tackle its poverty and inequality. So what happened was that inequality grew, jobs became less. We have a shrinking pie in terms of jobs. And so there is a backlash by men who feel women are taking over their jobs. It's not that women are taking over the jobs. The number of jobs themselves are shrinking. And nobody's addressing that root cause of the problem, that the pie itself is shrinking. So I think that backlash has led to this kind of more conservative values coming in, where in states like Rajasthan and Haryana, girls are again being married early, they are being aborted when they're conceived and all of that. Also rape, there's this anger among men who are not getting jobs, migration to big cities, and instead of addressing the problem where it should be, to political and economic systems which need to address this joblessness and this inequality. They see the women working and seeing them as their targets of misogyny. That is one reason why it's happening. Also, in the last 10 or 15 years, what's happened is that everything is getting commodified. There's a new culture which is coming into India. The notion of the market and market values. Which is fine up to a point, but now it's human bodies which are getting commodified in that. So, there's the titillation of girls' bodies which are on TV. So, to sell a car or a washing machine, there's a beautiful girl standing next to it, to add value. So, are we buying the washing machine or the woman? And these kind of mixed messages are coming through the media. At the same time, pornography has become very, very popular in India through phone apps and the internet and all of that. Blue movies are being distributed widely. India has become the third largest user of porn. And there, the porn narrative is also such that it creates a misogyny, it creates a hatred of girls and women. Because what you see, while a 12-year-old boy who's actually surfing the net to do homework is suddenly accosted with a cartoon character, and the cartoon character says, "Do you want to have some fun with me?" And 2 clicks later, he finds himself looking at a woman being penetrated in every part of her body, and crying and in pain and saying, "Give me more." Now, this is his first encounter with sex, and he begins to get confused, and he begins to think sex is connected to violence, or that when a woman is saying no, she means yes. And so he begins to look for that kind of sex. So we are grooming our men to think differently. And this kind of commodification, on one hand, of the woman being presented as a sexy object, and on the other hand, this creation of this masculine ideal of sex, of not listening to the woman, penetrating her, etc., is confusing people and creating this new rape culture, is what I call it in India. So there's a whole bunch of things which are happening, and it's hopefully the hope is that we have a very strong women's movement in India, and it's so noticeable after the December 16th raid. Young women are out on the streets marching in city after city, asking the government to create better laws to end impunity for rapes. And not only are young women marching, but young men too.
Yes.
And, it's fantastic because there is a whole new generation in their 20s who say that the new India they want to create does not stand for rape. They want equality with girls. The boys want to be friends with girls. They want to have sex, but on equal terms, without violence and domination. And if the government responds to this youth, to this new generation, we can certainly create a better India.
So can you tell us any experience in your 22 years of work that has left a seriously negative mark or indelible mark on your mentality, on you as an individual?
In a positive or
negative?
Negative. Well, the worst was, the debates I've had with some of the heads of foundations from the United States who were funding the salaries of pimps and brothel managers in India, and saying that they would call them peer educators and tell them that just go and distribute condoms inside brothels. I was really shocked by that because these were 12, 13, 14-year-old girls who were being raped repeatedly. And the head of foundations like the Gates Foundation, who I would talk to, and say that you've got to stop this, you've got to prevent these girls from being trafficked. They should be in school. Do not legitimize the people who control them, the pimps and brothel managers, by calling them peer educators, giving them salaries to distribute condoms. You're actually making the sex industry more powerful. And the answers I would get would be that, men will be men, prostitution is as old as the hills, or we don't do education, just stupid answers like that. And that lack of empathy by organizations which stood for doing good in the world was really the most negative experience I've had.
Wow. Sorry. So there's a widespread perception that girls are sold by their families in villages most of the time. However, I'm sure that it happens in cities as well. So I was wondering if you could clear up that perception and tell me, why girls are sold in the cities, and if it happens often as well, not just the villages.
I think more than thinking about the word soul, it's more important to think about the word bought. And girls are bought from villages. there are traffickers who are actually roaming around, preying upon poor families, and they actually figure out where to go. So if a place is affected by floods or famine, they show up there. And I saw this personally because I work in Bihar, and a few years ago, the Kosi River flooded there. And suddenly, traffickers showed up in village after village over there, preying upon families, saying, "Oh, your child is starving. We'll take your kids to Bombay or Delhi and get them jobs, or we'll get them married, etc." And literally, the families were homeless. They were starving. They had diseases. There were women-headed households. Families had broken up. Nobody knew where the other person was, and they were literally taking away these kids. There was like a pipeline set up from these villages in Bihar to the brothels of Delhi. And I saw this, and India Today did a big report about it. So what traffickers are doing is actually going and taking advantage of the vulnerabilities of these poor, starving parents who think, okay, I'll let my daughter go because at least she'll get a meal and a bed. I can give her nothing. She's starving here. So, the word sold is it's a misnomer because it's really being taken advantage of, for very little money.
In Bangladesh, child prostitutes, from what I know, child prostitutes are compelled and forced and coerced into using a steroid called Oradexon, I think is how it's pronounced, to make their bodies look adult. Yeah. And so, is this steroid also used in India? Was my question.
I've heard from other NGOs like Shakti Vahini that oxytocin has been used in India, and it was used once during the Commonwealth Games when traffickers thought that there would be a huge demand of buyers of prostituted sex or clients or johns in Delhi who would be all coming to watch the Commonwealth Games. So they brought in girls from Jharkhand, Bihar, Orissa and other tribal areas to Delhi who were underage. Some of them were thin. So they kept them in a place outside Delhi where they pumped them with this oxytocin to make them voluptuous faster. So that they would have, oxytocin is a hormone used to get cows to lactate.
Yeah.
And so it was given to these girls so they would have bigger breasts and, they would look more voluptuous for these men.
And are there any other usage of drugs in this profession other than that? Because at one time I was reading a book called A Walk Across the Sun, and this one, I think she was 12, girl was put in a plane and she was given several capsules of drugs to be kept in her stomach all across the plane. She couldn't move, she couldn't eat, she couldn't at all, otherwise the drugs inside her would pop and they wouldn't be able to, it would kill her instantaneously. So are there any other common uses of drugs in prostitution?
The substance abuse, drugs are a little expensive for those who are trapped in prostitution, but there is substance abuse, and tobacco, of course, is chewed and used rapidly. The women are constantly suffering from headaches. The girls are constantly suffering from headache. So definitely the brothel managers give them something. And it could range from even things which are thrown away on the streets and are picked up by garbage collectors for recycling. So, the backs of tires, glue which is used, adhesive for different products which are thrown into the streets, etc.
And so, what is your vision for child slaves? What do you see as their future?
I see a future in which no girl is bought or sold. I see a future where every girl has the freedom to realize her full potential for whatever she wants to be, to at least, to dream about it, to have the ability to dream about it and think about fulfilling it, from being a singer, a dancer, an artist, a lawyer, or a doctor, whatever she wants to be. And I see a future where her dreams are not ever crushed. I see a future where a girl who's between 13 and 19 is given as much respect as a man who's between 50 and 75, whose dreams are treated with consideration, whose ideas are treated respectfully, who is thought of as a dignified human being.
And so, do you think this is very possible or imminent in our future?
I have so much hope because I've just flown in from India today, this week. And in India, the youth are fighting for it. They're out on the streets, they're holding rallies, they're holding meetings, they're meeting members of parliament, they're making submissions, they're asking for better laws. And I think this generation, who are in their 20s and colleges right now, across our country, are going to change India. So I have a lot of hope, actually.
And so I know that because of your cause, you get several threats from mafia and very dangerous people. So how do you ignore all that and continue with your work with such passion? Is what I.
Word ignore, because I do get threatened. And once, as I was telling you, a knife was pulled out, or
Yeah.
sometimes my office is attacked. Sometimes, our car was stolen. My staff member has been stabbed and bleeding, and all of that. Last year, the police, which was corrupt in the place where we work, actually in collusion with the traffickers, they ended up arresting one of my staff members on false charges just to intimidate us. We managed to get him out, and we are trying to get the charges dropped, and the policeman held accountable for his actions. I basically ignore what they're doing and just carry on tenaciously, and also try to work with the good people in our society to balance the bad who try to hold sway. So, I always try to build coalitions of the good people in society, like teachers, like doctors, like lawyers, like the good politicians, the good policemen, and ask for their help and support, and I do get it. So I try to create that balance and take it on.
And so I was wondering, what are you doing here in New York?
I am here for the Commission for the Status of Women. This is March, and this is also the month for women. March 8th is the International Women's Day, the 102nd International Women's Day in the world. And I'm going to be speaking. Last Monday, I spoke to a group of young women who had put up a play called Slut. And these women had been either sexually abused themselves, or their friends had been sexually abused. So they put up, and they're also in high school, and they put up this play about the experiences with sexual abuse and how they want to challenge it. And it was a fantastic play, and they wanted to create more awareness about it. So I participated in a panel discussion after the play for the audience which was here.
And so, as a teenager, as a 15-year-old girl myself, I find I can't even imagine the worst possible thing that can happen is sexual abuse. And I've grown up in an area which is so protected, so I can't even go beyond and think of what the trauma they must go to, and adding to that hunger, abuse physically, verbal abuse, stabbing, as you said. So, is the main cause for I know that the brothel managers are sometimes women, but they're even controlled by higher mafia powers who are men. So I was wondering, is the main cause for all of this at the end of the day simply money?
Money, of course, is a big factor. Greed, because people want to make more and more money. The other is, I think, a desire for domination and violence, because they get addicted to that. People do it once, twice, thrice, and then I think something happens to the brain when you do it, because then you want to keep doing it, and slowly over the years you get desensitized.
And so why?
I think it's a combination of greed with sexism, misogyny in a way, hatred of girls.
Yeah. So why are the brothel managers sometimes women is something I was wondering
about. This is also, there are two reasons. One is historical and one is practical. The historical reason is that, the brothel areas in India were set up by the British. Yeah. And the British set them up because at one point when the British were ruling India, they found that there was a huge outbreak of syphilis among British soldiers and clerks. And so they felt that, oh God, if all these people die, then who's going to actually work for the British Empire in India? Because they needed soldiers and clerks. So what they did was they set up red light districts with licensed brothels under a new act called the Contagious Diseases Act. And what the Contagious Diseases Act did was that brothel managers were given licenses on the basis that they would trot out their prostitutes to some municipal authority who would check these prostitutes and see if they were disease free, then the license was renewed. And so that way they saved their soldiers and clerks from getting diseases, sexually transmitted diseases, and yet created a system where disease-free women would be sexually available for those in the service of the British Empire. Now, what that did was that because they were setting up these licensed brothels, they needed brothel managers. And because of course, all the people kept in the brothels, these soldiers and clerks were women, so they thought, okay, we'll get a woman to manage all these girls so that if there are any diseases, if there are any female-related problems, etc., then these women managers can look into it and take them to hospitals or whatever and handle it. So that was one reason why they created this notion of the madam, the brothel manager, as being a woman, because she was basically looking after all these girls. And this also happened in England. They were known as baronesses and madams in England too. So that is a historical reason. Now, why do women agree to become brothel managers even today? One is, of course, that some of them see that as a survival. So they are women in prostitution who have somehow, married the pimp or the brothel owner or something and figured that out as a way of getting out of the daily rape and to save their own skin by controlling other women and, pleasing the power system in the brothels, saving themselves at the cost of their sisters. So that's what they do. And then the work itself desensitizes them, so then they keep on at it.
And what can a person like me, a teenager like me in the U.S., do to prevent all this and to help and do their best to stop this from getting even worse, this whole issue of prostitution?
There are many, many things you could do. First is, of course, that you could create more awareness in your school, in your community about this by holding actions. So you could, show my documentary, for example, The Selling of Innocence, and talk about this issue. So more people will get to know about it. The second is that you could actually write and run letter writing campaigns to the big foundations who are funding the salaries of pimps and brothel managers in India. So to the Gates Foundation, etc., saying that you're a girl and you would like your girls your age in Calcutta or in Bombay to have a chance to go to school. So why don't they prioritize their AIDS management program by getting girls into school? Because if girls are not in brothels, they're less likely to get AIDS. And so rather than thinking about saving just the 45-year-old customers from AIDS, what about thinking about saving the 15-year-old girl from AIDS? And by preventing her sexual exploitation, by preventing her trafficking. So you could whip up a whole campaign around that, and it could spread to campus after campus. You could volunteer for some of our activities. We always need help with letter writing, volunteering, tweeting our messages out, uploading things on our Facebook. So that would be very helpful. Fundraising for us because, about $1,500 a year, gets one girl into a school. And for 5 years, 1,500 into 5 would help her to finish high school. So you could sponsor a girl there and to see how that works. And, so there are so many different ways, and you could always write to your senators, to your legislators, to make sure that the girls in your neighborhood are also protected, because as you know, sex trafficking happens in the United States as much as in India.
And lastly, I run a club at my school called One Girl at a Time, and it's for the same cause. And I was just wondering, is there ever a chance where you'll be coming to California sometime and you can talk to my school of 800 teenagers on how to spread this message and how to help young girls?
I would love to come. And if you can just send an email, and
Yes.
whenever I'm coming to California, we'll make sure that I do that. But I would like you, if you think about this, is there's a young girl called Poonam,
Ye-
and she was born in a community where her mother was trafficked, her sister was trafficked into a red light area. But we managed to put her into a girls' hostel. She's going to be giving a high school exam in March this year. She has become a karate champ. She's winning gold medals in karate. And she is a big, big fighter against trafficking. And I would love you to invite her to come to
Absolutely.
talk to your high
Absolutely.
school. Because I think it would be a dream come true for her to know where she is out in a village in Bihar, that she has girls her age in a country called America, in California, who are willing to stand shoulder to shoulder with her. And I think, if you invited her as a speaker, that would be even better.
Absolutely. I will. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for this interview. It made such an impact on me. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. You asked wonderful and really insightful questions.
Thank you. I'll give it to my mom now. She wanted to say something to you, actually.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruchira. Thank you so much. And
I just have one more question for your daughter before she runs away. What are your dreams? What do you want to do?
Actually, I'm a journalist as well at my school, and my whole life, everyone around me is becoming a doctor or a lawyer, and I just wanted to be like my mom and become a journalist. However, I wanted to make an impact on the world through my journalism, and I wanted to make, and this issue, when I was very young, I read books on it, I watched some movies about it, very rare movies, and it really hurt me because I was very young and I knew that these girls are being tortured in such ways. So I wanted to do my best to help those who are less fortunate than the community where I grew up through my journalism and through whatever means possible. That's my dream, essentially, right now.
It's really interesting because when I was 15, there was a journalist who interviewed me in Calcutta. She said, "What's your dream?" And I said, "I want to be a journalist." And the reason is because I think the world is a very unfair place. And if I could write about it, then maybe it could become a little bit more fair. And, you sound exactly the same.
That's such an honor for me to be. Thank you for that. Thank you.
I'm sure you'll be a wonderful journalist. You have a good role model in Gloria Steinem.
Yeah, I do. My mom. She's actually the one who wanted me. She wanted me to be different, not insular, because where she grew up in India, and she saw that there was so much, misogyny there. There's so many insular perspectives. So she put me in a school where I could be as diverse as possible, where I could be susceptible to all sorts of views, and through that I was able to reach a place where I could voice my opinions on this issue. It was I really wanted to make an impact.
Well, lots of luck, and I
Thank
hope
you.
articles soon.
Yes.